when the Civil War actually started between the North and the South, there was a law in place that said that African Americans couldn't serve. And that was passed after the Revolution in 1792. But some men did. Some freed men and some slaves were pressed into service. Most of them got into the Navy and some into the Army. They started to accept black enlistees. So we're going to spend a couple of minutes with a Civil War vet and find out what it was like to serve in those years. Our vet is named Cathay Williams. She's a woman. In fact, she's the only documented woman to serve in the U.S. Army during the Civil War. Ladies and gentlemen, Cathay Williams. The Cathay story is very interesting because when you think of the service, you most often think of men who are serving. Nowadays, we get to serve. But in the Civil War, it wasn't like that. In fact, African Americans weren't even allowed to serve. So, Cathay, let's start with your time in service. It wasn't really your choice to begin with, was it?
No, sir. It wasn't my choice. I was born in Missouri. My mother was a slave. My father was a free black man. But I made me a slave anyway because of my mother. So here I was in Missouri, a slave. So I had to serve on the Jackson plantation at that time, Johnson's plantation at that time with my mother.
Now, how did you end up in the Army then? Was there a program that the Union and the South did when they took over a town?
Well, what happened is, back in the day, with slaves, we were property of our masters. So being property of, when the Union Army came through, which was the North Army, when they would come through and take over cities, we were classified as contraband. So they were allowed to take us, to use us still. So we were still slaves. I, being a female woman, I had to cook, I did laundry, the wounded, I had to care for the wounded at that time. I didn't have a choice. I still had to go along and do what they told me to do.
And you traveled with the Army. I mean, you marched with the Army wherever they went. Some of those treks must have been pretty long.
Yes, sir. I was with the 8th Infantry, Indiana Infantry. So from Missouri, we went to Louisiana, we went to Mississippi, we went to Georgia, and that was all marching.
Now, were there other blacks in the service at that time other than the people who were getting picked up as the Union won various battles throughout the South?
At first, I didn't see any blacks that were able to serve in uniform. Not until I got to Little Rock, Arkansas. That was the first time I got to see colored in uniforms just like the Union Army.
It doesn't sound really, though, like African Americans would even want to serve at that point anyhow. Was that the case, or did they join up freely?
Well, some joined up freely because they promised us, if the Confederate Union promised us our freedom if we would serve. So, and then some of them, our masters forced us to serve and fight for them. But with the Union, we were fighting for our freedom, for us to be free, is what we were told, that we'd become free.
All right, so what I'm getting, you were pressed into service. You weren't really in the Army. How did that part come about, that you ended up being the first woman in the U.S. Army then?
Well, not till after the Civil War, not till 1866, when they were going to allow colored troops to actually join and enlist for $13 a month. That was the white soldiers. The black soldiers were given $10 a month because we had to pay for our uniform. So at that time, they offered, when the North and the South came together, they had to bring the military together. So now they were allowing us to enlist. Well, here I was, 17 years old. I'd been under the Union Army all this time for 3 years. I didn't know what else to do. So I figured if I look like a man, I can enlist and I can take care of myself. For the first time, I'm going to make money for me and be able to take care of me. So I told my cousin and a best friend of mine that this was my idea. So I joined the Army And they accepted me without knowing and realizing that I was a woman.
All right, so that young man that was sitting there had asked about that mannequin that we have standing there. He asked me if it was a woman. Can we assume that you kind of looked like that back in the day? You made your hair look real short and everything, and you made yourself look like a young boy, right?
Yes, sir. I was able to cut my hair, wear baggy clothes, and they didn't do any physical checks like they do nowadays with the doctor. So I was able to just come in there dressed with baggy clothes and look like I was a man and be able to fool them.
So was it different for you then, or were you doing the same kind of jobs? When you were pressed into service, you were forced to cook, to clean, to sew, to be a nurse. What were you doing as a member of the Army?
Oh, now I was part of being a soldier, learning the infantry, which we marched. So now I was learning how to shoot a gun. I was learning how to guard our post. I did all the military duties of a man, what a man would have to do.
It sounds almost like you may have enjoyed it. What made it come to an end finally?
Well, at that time, being in the military, in the post, there was a lot of closeness and there was a lot of disease. I got sick a lot. With being sick all the time, that was part of the reason they found out. After 2 years, they sent me to the doctor, and that's when they did a physical examination and found out that I was not a man, but a woman. So,
and they drummed you out of the service at that point, right?
at that point, they kicked me out.
Honorable discharge?
No, it was given an honorable because it was, in fact, I had already served for 2 years, and the only difference was I was a woman, so what else?
But you didn't get your pension, did you?
No, sir. Not being a woman, they said that I couldn't get a pension. I tried many years later with all the illnesses. I ended up with diabetes. I ended up losing part of my foot. So I was trying to figure out how to make a living and get a medical pension because some of the men were allowed to, but not me, being a woman.
Now, you served during the Civil War, and that's approximately the time after the Civil War when the Buffalo Soldier started. And there are some history books who say that you're the first female Buffalo Soldier. Do you consider that to be the case, or do you have a different view on it?
Well, technically, you know, we were still the 9th and 10th and the infantry with the 38th, the 24th and 25th Infantry. I served with the 38th Infantry. At the time, when I was kicked out after 2 years, the Buffalo Soldier name hadn't been established yet. That came after the 2 years that I was out. But technically, with quotation marks, all colored troops were classified under the Buffalo Soldier name.
All right. And actually, a picture of the real Cathay Williams is on the screen right now.
Yes, sir.
And there's a bust of you in Leavenworth, Kansas, correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. They do honor me with being the first female documented. Now, there's cases that they believe the women had fought with the Civil War, Revolutionary War, all through. And so at this point, this was the first time that it was documented that they actually have me documentate, you know, the documentations of my paperwork.
How do you see your place in history? Do you, or do you even?
I do. I believe with that, it opened up the door for other females to do what we do today, to be able to join the military and fight alongside the men. We've contributed all this time. We had WACs, the women that fought in the wars from here on. They've always done it, so why not?
Ladies and gentlemen,